Hello, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural show of Yet to Be Named. We're still working on that. If you got any ideas, you can write into us. We're happy to entertain. But my name's John Ferguson. I'm one of the co-hosts, and with me, as always, is Jason Semino. And our first guest is comedian Scott Williams. And Scott used to work a little bit on the Atlanta circuit years ago, and
Yep.
still does some work from time to time now. But we wanted to have him on the show because we wanted to just learn more about the profession, what it
Happy to
takes.
be here.
Yes. Thank you, Scott. So anyway, let's go ahead and kick it off. We're pretty informal around here, and Scott,
let's hear it.
I'll start with the first question. Tell us, and
Okay.
it's a typical question. What inspired you to go into comedy?
Gosh, as far back as I can remember, I always just enjoyed making people laugh. Always felt really nice, and I just enjoyed the kind of attention that came with that, and just the way it made me feel, and made other people feel, and I just thought it was great. I quickly adopted the class clown moniker, but I was always aspiring to be classroom famous, but at some point you gotta kind of let that go. But I remember laying on the couch watching the Comedy Channel. It was comedy. Yeah, the Comedy Channel. It's a Comedy Central now. One way or the other. The station had just rolled out, and they would play reruns of Mystery Science Theater 3000 and stand-up comedy all day long, and I thought it was fantastic. And that's when I knew I wanted more than just a class clown. I really wanted to be a stand-up comedian. Now, in Dothan, Alabama, growing up there, I didn't have a lot of outlets for something like that, or for a career in comedy. So I ended up moving to Atlanta, and here we are.
So, did you move to Atlanta to pursue a career in comedy, or was it other things?
I had an opportunity. It was a job. It was just an 8 to 5 job, and I wanted to. I remember one day, a buddy and I, we had lost our jobs at similar time frame, and we were sitting next to each other on computers and library, and we were job searching. And I'll never forget just seeing kind of the same old stuff. I'll never forget this was on Monster, I believe. That's how long ago this was. Expanding my search to Atlanta, Georgia.
Right.
And that was huge. My sister had just moved to Atlanta, but everyone else was still there in Dothan, and I didn't know anyone other than my sister. And I saw a job that I was qualified for, and I had a good idea that I could if interviewed, that I could get this job. So it became a super real thing for me, moving 4.5 hours, up the road to another state in a major city, coming from, a small town. And I was about 21, 22, and ended up getting the job and coming to Atlanta, and was really kind of taken aback. I wasn't used to any sort of a big city anything. But I also knew I needed to be out, whether out west or big city like Atlanta, if I were ever to achieve any sort of goals with comedy.
And so I remember you and I, we were talking off air about this, but you got quite a bit of success. I mean, relatively, I don't want to say relatively easy. It was a grind. You told me it's a grind, working at doing like open mics at like coffee houses, and there's like,
yeah. Oh yeah.
You want you there or whatever. But
those are the worst.
But like you were telling me that,
hard.
you didn't you recently do a show on New Year's Eve, open for Chris Kattan?
I did, Chris Kattan. Yep.
Chris Kattan.
So that was really cool. You know, I've been super fortunate to work with a lot of awesome folks and comedy in general. You know, all these open mics, and then you mentioned the coffee shop with 4 people in attendance. You know, you got one guy just trying to enjoy his pumpernickel scone, and 2 ladies are just trying to catch up with each other, and then we're up there, you know, going into some 4-minute spiel.
What is that like? Like, do you just like walk up and do you just grab a mic, be like, "Hey, everybody, I'm gonna tell some jokes"?
So it's a pretty common thing here in Atlanta for coffee shops to host like an open mic. And by that, it's, you know, if you want to come up here and read poetry or whatever. And you know, there's some larger places with a bigger following that's pretty healthy group, and they're just it's a routine, and so folks are you know, local to that shop or used to that kind of stuff, and they may go there with the intention of doing that. But other places do it just to try to bring in extra business, and it's fun. But if it's not this well-established routine, you have a crowd of people that some folks are just looking to get in and out, cars still running, or like I said, they're, you know, just some guy enjoying his coffee, and there may be 1, 2 patrons in there, and it's, hey, good evening, everybody, thanks for coming out. You know, when they had no intention of going there, but or to, you know, hear your work, but it's absolutely essential. I used to equate it to shooting hoops. You know, if you can find a goal, you need to shoot, you need to practice, and it's these places I found were fairly uncomfortable. I'm much more comfortable with a large crowd, but it's essential to work out. It's where you got to go to work your jokes out. You know, some folks, you know, you'll just do it in the car, but that doesn't cut it. What's funny to you doesn't necessarily mean it would translate and be funny to other people.
Go ahead, John. But I had a question about
Go ahead.
when you actually go. Okay, so this is something I always wanted to ask, like real comics, okay?
Okay.
I've been to some comedy nights, right? And I've heard people tell, you know, do a bit and tell stories and stuff like that. And it's almost like, for the most part, you feel almost compelled to laugh, even if you really didn't think the joke was that funny, because everybody else is laughing, right? And so almost like laughter's contagious. How do you know if like, if you do a joke and it's really killing, it's like really hitting, it's spot on, or it's just like kind of like a pity laughter, like
Well, I think we've all gotten some of those, but it is laughter is super contagious, and it tends to roll backward. So if you can get those folks on the front row on your side, you know, and you always want to start with a good tried and true joke. You want to put your newer stuff, maybe your untested stuff, or whatever the case is, stuff you're working on. You want to tuck that in the middle, and then you always want to end on a really good, you know, tried and true joke. And of course, you know, you got to read the room. Things like that is super important. Just being aware enough of, I could spend probably 30, 60 seconds in a room, if less than that maybe, and tell you the temperature of the room or what my set list is going to be like. I'm automatically pulling certain jokes and plugging in other ones and things like that. So if you can read that room, you'll be just fine. But if it's not funny, they'll let you know by not doing anything. Yeah, and that's very uncomfortable. And if you get on a good roll, and again, if these folks in front are, you know, kind of a boisterous group, that's perfect. And the more they're laughing, it just everyone else will tend to join in and just rolls backward. But if you're not allowing the process to happen, so if I tell a joke and it gets a good response, but I don't, and a lot of folks who do this if they're not super confident, if I don't pause and let you laugh, that's called stepping on your laughs, then the audience will stop because they don't want to miss what you're saying now.
Right.
So no matter how much they're enjoying the show, they're worried they're going to miss the next joke, or you know, but you totally killed that momentum that was there, that you're building. So if you're stepping on your laughs, you know, you just got to slow it down. So a good rule of thumb is go as slow as possible, and when you get to that speed, go a little bit slower.
So what I'm kind of picking up on, Scott, is there's a method to it, and
Sure.
I mean, obviously it's creativity coming to life, but you know, still there's a method that you follow. So is this stuff that you learned on your own, or it seems like you told me a while back, because, you know, spoiler alert, I've known Scott for a few years now, that you took a class or something, I mean, along those lines. And what kind of training did you engage in?
I did. And, you know, a lot of people, you just kind of feel like you're born funny, or, you know, things like that. But really, no matter how witty or, you know, funny that you feel, you really, you know, in order to really succeed and be successful in that industry, you have to polish. You have to polish it up. And so if you can take lessons from veteran, and there's some really good folks in Atlanta. Jeff Justice taught a class, a workshop that I was in. So initially I did a workshop with Dad's Garage for oh shoot, what's the improv? Sorry, improv comedy. It's very difficult stuff, but it's super rewarding and very funny, and that was great. I learned so much, and you really get over any sort of stage fright. That's the time to do it. You're thinking on your feet, you're being silly, trying to stay in character, but you just get a natural footing and a you know, a bit of confidence that comes with that. So after that, I went straight to Jeff Justice, and gosh, that you know, you learn to write jokes. So back to what I was saying about feeling like you're born funny, and some people just say, I don't know, I'm just kind of a funny guy. A lot of that's situational. He responds to things funny, or she responds to things, you know, in a witty way, or you know, if a situation presents itself, you're just, you know what I mean, you can respond
Right.
in funny ways, or you know, a witty response. But what you need to do here is you're generating those situations, and you're creating all that stuff from scratch. So being able to write jokes is absolutely fundamental. You can't just stand around and wait for something funny to pop in your head in response to something else. So you're creating this whole thing, and your whole set list, and you're writing jokes. And once you learn to write, you have all you need. I mean, there's other ways to kind of polish things up, but that was huge. It allowed me to, when I stopped performing, you know, 5-6 years later, I was able to create a whole new set list and perform, like Jason had mentioned, at a New Year's Eve show just recently. So
Right. So when you got into comedy, you know, a lot of people who pursue something in the creative arts, but comedy, acting, music, I mean, the end game is usually to try to make it big. You know, they dream of that anyway.
Yeah.
And so, you know, was that your dream? I mean, where did you see yourself 10 years after starting? I mean, what were you hoping for?
So honestly, in the beginning, and I say beginning, like high school, and my best friend at the time, once we graduated, he was a communications major at University of Alabama in Birmingham. And we connected to, I mean, we were very close in high school, but afterwards, we stayed connected, and we kind of tag team a public access. That's what I'm trying to think of, a public access
Right.
TV show. and it was straight shtick type comedy. So you know, they were just bits and skits and things like that. He ultimately moved out to LA and to pursue everything. And I, at the time, I fully had it in my mind that this is where I'm going to end up. This is how this is going to be. And I think when I got plugged in here in Atlanta, things had just changed. You know, I had a young family, and you know, as much as I thought that would be great, you know, in this whole that just wasn't for me. I wanted to be successful at comedy. I wanted to make people laugh, and the entire time I was super grateful for that opportunity. Some people wanted to grow up and be a doctor. I wanted to grow up and be a stand-up comedian. So I did lots and lots of local stuff. Done some work in South Carolina, some in Alabama, obviously Georgia. Been to a few college campuses. Those are always a blast. But I guess to answer your question, for me in the beginning, but then it just became about life just evolved around my wife and kids. And I was just thrilled to have this opportunity. I was working Wednesday nights, Friday nights, and Saturday nights. This is once I was a little more established and I had a like a paid gig and you know, in regular work, steady work. You know, I was just having a blast. I mean, you put your picture and some captions and some information on a flyer. No matter how cheap they may look, you know, or even the ones that are even better. I've always collected that stuff, always kept it. I was just kind of in awe of this opportunity. And there's a lot of really awesome people, for sure. I know comics that, and they're all super supportive of each other. They're really great. I know folks that would sleep in a van, literally 4 of them, and they traveled from Georgia to you know, up north, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around like Wisconsin. They're sleeping in this van. There's 4 of them, mind you, and they were booking trips, you know, booking their own shows as they went. I knew plenty of people that slept on friends' floors, you know, and just trying their hardest to grind this thing out and working, you know, a part-time job just to make ends meet so that they can try to, you know, just grind it out. I think that's
it sounds like it's very similar to pretty much anything in show business. I mean, you hear these stories all the time about like actors that, you know, they basically, actors and actresses sell everything they have, all their worldly positions, you know, out to Hollywood, you know, with like $17 in their pocket, you know,
oh yeah,
you know, hanging out the soup kitchen or whatever, just trying to get, you know, just trying to get some airtime so they can get into, you know, commercials or be an extra on, you know, Nash Bridges or whatever the case may be or whatever. So it sounds like it's quite similar. The other thing I was going to ask you is, you know, like probably one of my favorite comedians right now, Kevin Hart, and you know, he's got a couple books and stuff like that, and I've read his books or whatever. But he talks about, you know, early on, he would write all these jokes, but they were all fake jokes, like stuff that never happened. He just made stuff, right? And you know, his mentor, I think it was Patrice O'Neill was his mentor, legendary comic. But he said, you know, it would have to pass the Patrice test. You think, is that real? And you're like, no, it's not real. He's like, well, what about this story about the midget? Is that real? He's like, no, that's not real. I made it up. I don't know. He's like, people don't know anything about you, you know?
Right.
How, I mean, obviously this is Kevin Hart and he's at the pinnacle of comedy, but just in general for like, you know, working at the Punchline or Improv or, you know, coffee shops, like how much of that is real? Like how much material was true to life stuff that you kind of, you know, comedied it up a little bit?
So this goes back to Jeff Justice and his class. It's easiest to create your material around true things because it's easier to remember, and people can tell if it's real or not for the most part. But it's easier to just draw from things that have happened, and it's relatable. Obviously, there's some, some of these, like a wild, crazy event, that may have happened that sounds made up, but it could be true. But it's just easier to do that, and the more of yourself that comes out, you're just more original, and it's so much better. It's just going to be a better experience for you. So like you said, if you're trying to beef up your stories, you're beefing up who you are. And then you're always, you need to stay in some sort of rhythm, so if I'm talking about, how, whatever the case is, how luxurious things are, or how I travel the world all the time. Well, your material, so the next few shows or all the other jokes you need to write should fall in line with that, or else you're just making up this character that changes from time to time. And I think people appreciate, more honesty. Obviously, right. We embellish and we make things funny, or certainly try. But yeah, I like to tell. So that was a big thing with Jeff that Jeff taught us. Kind of stay true to that, yourself and your habits and your life. So my set list that I created and wrote from Jeff's class up until now, I realized I wanted to be, and I went through this phase a little bit where I wasn't quite sure which kind of comic I wanted to be, like, or my style, deadpan, or a current events, or kind of the storytelling. And I really got hooked on the storytelling, and that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I wrote. Here's where I'm from. Here's what led me to now I'm in front of you, that kind of stuff.
Can you mix styles? Like, can you do like, kind of like what you're just saying, mix it in with like, storytelling or self-deprecating humor, or,
Oh, sure.
Like, or you got to kind of like stay in your lane. Like, you pick like, this is your style and this is what you got to go with. I mean, especially.
I think it just maybe dipping is one thing, but going from, say, this real dry kind of sense of humor where it's a little more deadpan or on the nose kind of stuff. Or so for example, if you look at like Dave Chappelle, he's very much current events. And occasion he's self-deprecating, and that's always, Bill Burr, real similar style. So self-deprecating, I'm glad you mentioned that, is also a really big part. No matter how funny you feel like you are, if you can't take a joke, then you probably shouldn't be giving jokes, right? Or hitting people with these things, if you can't take the joke yourself. So, definitely a thick skin comes in, but being able to be self-deprecating is like, you got to have that to even have a chance. It's just not, any sort of temperament like that is just, you could see, it's very transparent, and it's a big turnoff, I've always felt. So I guess to answer your question, you certainly can, but I think there's some styles, this woe is me style, which I think is a little different than self-deprecating. That's almost like a lighthearted way of taking a shot at yourself. For example, I'm from Dothan, Alabama, and so I'll tell the story of, right?
There's a whole slew of jokes that come from that.
Yeah, so I'll start with, hey, I'm from Dothan, Alabama, and you guys have heard a lot about Southeast Alabama, but a lot of stereotypes, but they're not true. And here's why. So I would, start to tell you things that were clearly very stereotypical, and then say, just like most of you, I'm sure, and clearly think, no, I didn't do that, or no, I wasn't a part of that. So yeah, self-deprecating and storytelling is mine. but you know, you look, and one of my favorite comics is Jeff Ross. I was watching Jeff Ross on the couch back in the Comedy Central days, or Comedy Channel. I'm gonna have to look that up. But he's a little bit of all that. He's definitely, absolutely self-deprecating, but he's current events, and he can just freestyle. I mean, he is exceptionally funny, and he is so good without a script. You know, he can really play into all those styles.
You know,
super talented.
To be honest, I don't follow a lot of comedy. I don't have a list of favorite comedians or anything like that. But there's always those comics who just revert to foul language and sex, and you know, and like and I don't know, when you listen to the audience, it almost sounds like the laughter is a little forced. What always surprises me, though, is that there are a lot of comics out there that revert to sex,
Sure.
foul language, you know, bad,
Easy
nasty
crutch.
yeah, but they still have a tremendous amount of success, and you know, I that baffles me a little bit. But I like the folks that are clever, that you know, and it's not that I'm afraid or that I'm offended or anything like that, but it's just be clever. You know, that's what I
Absolutely.
always.
Yeah, and you know, another big promo for Jeff Justice here, but that was another thing. He said, you know, this is a clean workshop. You're going to write clean jokes, and you're going to perform them, and you're going to do well, and I'll make sure of that. I'm going to guide you through all of this. Now, what you do after the workshop, after graduation, that's up to you. But in here, it's clean. And he explained it to, you know, a great example, you know, and obviously there's, you know, like you mentioned, Eddie Murphy is, you know.
But he was clever.
He's very clever. You're right. Super popular. Andrew Dice Clay, you know, was on a long run for a while. So
Dice Man,
you know, or even yeah, like Dave Chappelle, you know, lots of profanity. Bill Burr, I love Bill Burr's hysterical, you know, same thing, but they're so good. Chris Rock, you know, they're so good at what they do, and they're so clever that they can drop these words in. I think they're used mostly, feel like they're used for emphasis on things, but it is a quick crutch because it's just not, you know, you need to be funny first. And what's not funny is, you know, in my opinion, is just throwing a lot of F-bombs and trying to kind of dirty it up where people will find it funny. And maybe it is in a you know, bar when everybody's soused, or you know, when it's just you and your buddies sitting around the garage, you know, having some beer. But it's a crutch for sure. People feel like, well, hey, I talk this way in real life.
Yeah.
So when I'm going to set these jokes up, I need to, you know, I'm going to drop some F-bombs, and it just, you have it gives you the, I guess the ability, for lack of a better term, to really turn off people in that crowd. And it's just a safer play. And again, I think it's just more clever to be witty, you know, like Jeff Foxworthy is an example of a clean comic that is wildly popular. And
Bill Engvall's another one. He's hysterical.
Yeah, and you know, if you've ever known someone, I can remember kids in elementary school or middle school that would curse just because they could, and it was the worst. Like they thought it was cool and hip and funny, but it didn't even make sense, you know, when they would say it, or didn't, you know what I mean? So just kind of.
And you know, like, to be fair, like at the time when Andrew Dice Clay was, I mean, he was selling out Madison Square Garden, which at the time that was like unheard of for a comic.
Yeah.
But his was kind of like it was like his shtick, you know, like to be absolutely filthy. If you remember, it was right around the same time as like NWA and, you know, it was like, it was so
it was a shock.
it was like, Howard Stern. It was like a shock jock. It was in your face, and that was what made him so. It was almost like appalling, but my, he's hysterical. I want to watch it. You know,
I liked Andrew Dice Clay. I mean, sometimes it felt like he might be taking the easy way out, but he really became this character, you know,
and listen, it works. I mean, the reason he did that is because it worked so well.
Right.
Larry the Cable Guy.
There's a difference, you know, if you go into some of these comedy shows, these up and coming guys, or even ones that are, you know, have a steady rotation going. You're not Chris Rock. Like, he's got that nailed down. Trying to be. That's the other thing is if you try to be one of these folks, one of your, you know, these celebrities, and again, you know, Dane Cook was another one. Used a lot of cursing or sexual references, you know, things like that. He was selling out arenas, and that is insane. Most of your comics today are selling out theaters, and they're doing it, you know, several $100s a ticket. But they're doing theaters and ballrooms and places like that. These guys were selling out literal arenas like Madison Square Garden, which is insane. They were wildly successful, but it was just a time and a place. It's not there's really no formula for success, but there's certainly a formula to walk you right there, you know, to where you're good and crafted. A lot of it just depends on you. I would tell young comics, do it without it. And then I used to believe I had a lot of anxiety that I needed a drink or two before I go on stage. And I would take the second beer with me on stage. And for whatever reason, it just made me feel comfortable to have something I'm holding. And one night, I took a drink from the beer because I'd seen people do this, where they're, you know, like sipping some whiskey or something. White.
Ron
White. Sorry.
Yeah.
He would do that and look super cool doing it, and the crowd would just eat it up. I did this with the beer and kept, you know, finished my set, and I got off stage, and the guy that was running the show, he called me over, and he turned out, you know, he's my mentor, my comedy mentor, and he said, you got to lose that beer bottle. And he said, it's a crutch, clearly, because you're not feeling comfortable, but more so when you took a drag off that beer, he said it was a good 4 to 5 seconds, and you absolutely destroyed your momentum.
Yep.
And it was really awkward, and I felt really bad about that, and I had no idea I'm shooting myself in the foot doing something I thought it was certainly a crutch, but also thought, oh, I saw this on TV and it kills, you know, or it's a cool move, and it just wasn't. That's not, you know, not.
Have you ever been booed before?
Ron White's been doing that set for 25 years, you know.
Jason,
sorry about
question.
That. I'll say, have you ever been booed before?
I haven't been booed, but you know, I've certainly told jokes that, you know, we may as well have been in a library. That's tough, but you learn from that, and as awkward as it feels, you got to laugh about it, and that's a lot of times you learn what works, what doesn't work, or you know, what the reading the room, or maybe it's just not funny. And no matter how funny you are, everybody's got ideas or jokes that there's a reason why they don't make it into the set, you know, or that's why you go to the coffee shop. Maybe it sounds completely different when it comes out of your mouth with a microphone. And, you know, if you're telling your significant other, I was telling my fiance the whole time, or my wife, oh, you know, here, I'm going to run 2 minutes past you and see what you think. And she laughs because she's my fiance, or because she's my wife. Your buddies laugh because their buddies on stage telling a joke, and it's like, it's just cool to see, you know, and so they're getting a kick out of it. But the real honest critics are in that in those seats, you know, and you can. So I haven't been booed. I did do a show at Uptown Comedy Club in Atlanta. They're famous for booing comics off stage if they don't cut it. And I agreed to do a show there before I knew where it was. There's a comedy competition, about 12 folks in it. And once I was told, here's where it is. I was hungry, super hungry at the time. I'd perform wherever at any time. Just give me the address and I would be there. And so I was told to Google it. Sure enough, there's plenty of YouTube videos of them booing. It's kind of like the Apollo, like they're, you know, if you're not cutting it, they're going to let you know it very loudly. And it is traumatic, you know, for a comic. So I went into this thing, which my goal was just don't get booed. I knew if I did, it was going to take a hit, you know, to my confidence. I was super thankful I got put in that position, and then I'd agreed to do it and stuck with it. I certainly thought about backing out for a minute, but I got there and I did. You know, they only gave us 3 minutes, and so it was a pretty quick turnaround. So I couldn't do the set I was used to. I just had to condense it, make it make sense, and I got through it and got some really good laughs. And I didn't win. I think it was probably like 3rd or 4th place, but I was super pumped to have made it through without getting booed off, because there certainly was other people that got booed off. But that was a big confidence booster for me.
Did you have like an agent, or how did you find work, or like how did you get these calls? Like you said, you were super hungry. If they just gave you an address, you'd go. How did you?
Oh, sure. So, you know, and this is I mean, you know, there was some Googling going on, I guess, or some search engine stuff, but pre-social media, MySpace was just getting started. You know, old Tom had just rolled out MySpace. But what I was doing was there was a group of us from Jeff's class that stuck together, and we were going to let each other know if we heard about any shows or opportunities. So that was the plan, but I was just so in love with comedy. I started calling places, and I would search for open mics, or that's typically where you would, or how it would be listed. And I met my mentor, who was Jed Fearon, and Jed ran a show out of the Atlanta, or Buckhead Diner rather, downtown, and he did a Friday night and Saturday night show. I called him, and of course he was at work, and I told him, gave him my spiel, and he just liked that I was passionate enough to call him and say, can I please have some time, or how do I go about getting some time? And I'd called some other places, hadn't heard anything back. I called a place in south of Atlanta, I believe it was Valdosta or somewhere, and everybody wanted at least 10 minutes, 10, 12 minutes, and you'd have to send your tape in. And I would just be honest with them. I was scared I didn't want to set myself up. So I would say, look, I've got like 8. There's, you know, one call us when you got 12 or whatever, you know. So I get a hold of Jed. He takes me under his wing, and I meet him on a Friday night, show up early, and he's going to let me go up first. So I was very excited, but it had been probably 30 days since I had done the graduation with Jeff's class. And of course, I have a couple beers, but I'm like, hey, this stuff was drilled in my head. I'm good to go. Let's go. I had a couple buddies with me. They're sitting in the front. There's probably 12 people all together in there. And I get going on my set, about 3 jokes in, and completely blank. Like, no idea what comes next. And you just freeze, and everyone in the crowd knows what's going on. And my buddy looked at me like, oh, yeah, you know, I would snatch you. I could pull you out of here if, you know, if I could. But I was super embarrassed. And probably 4 or 5 seconds later of just this freeze, you know, it just comes to me. My joke list or set list was in my pocket, and I didn't want to reach for it. Because Jeff, that was another thing. Like, don't, you memorize this stuff so thoroughly, you do not bring a set list on stage and that kind of stuff. So that's how I was taught and trained. And so I didn't pull for it, but luckily it just came back, and I made a joke about forgetting it. I think I said something about, we'll do this like Tarantino style, and I'll just tell you from the back. I'll reverse it to here.
Yeah.
And it got a few laughs, and I finished up. And when I got done, I told Jed, I said, listen, if you'll have me back, I promise you that will never happen again. He laughed about it and said, no big deal. And I was with him from there on out. He brought me along to tons of shows, and there were opportunities, and he could bring someone, he would bring me. If he couldn't bring anyone, oftentimes he would send me in his place. And I was just super flattered. He's a great guy and really, really cool, and had some good connections. And so that's how, 5-6 years, that's how I got through and got a lot of the work, not all of it, but a lot of the work I did.
And so, we're kind of coming up against our time here, Scott, but just lastly, I mean, what, you're not as busy with comedy these days as you were, but as passionate as you were about it at one time, why did you step away from it?
So, it was a combination of things. I would say, I mentioned earlier the Wednesday night show. I was hosting shows on Wednesday night, hosting shows on Friday and Saturday nights for years. Well, I had a young son at the time, and my wife, where I was taking way too much time from them. I would leave at, say, 7 Friday night, get back at like 10:30, and then to do the same thing the next night. And my son is with me on the weekends, so I'm already chewing into time or borrowing from time I didn't really have much of with him. And I was just doing this cool, amazing, fun, fulfilling thing, but over and over and over. And it wasn't fair to my wife, and she was super supportive. So I just felt like at one point, it's time to hand this off. What does she want to do? And it was an amazing run, and I did some shows. My son had an accident, had some health issues, and I just, at the same time, and I just lost for a while. I just didn't find much funny. It was a very traumatic thing, and he's okay now, but it was just a lot for me, and taking all the time away, it was just a lot. It was a lot. So I decided it's been a great run. It's been super fantastic. I talked to my mentor about it, and I finished the shows I had agreed to do, and that was it. I'm so grateful. I wrote out, on top, and in my world, I did exactly what I wanted to do, and loved it, and don't have a single complaint about it.
Didn't you tell me that? I thought you told me offline that you had to stop comedy because it was against your macrame classes.
Oh yeah. So really into tying knots with rope. I got a macrame fetish.
You hung up the comedy mic to pick up your macrame. That's cool.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, I'm not here to judge, man.
Making hammocks in a macrame style.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it, man.
Yeah, I don't really have much other hobbies. I like to sketch from time to time, but man, comedy and just telling jokes has always been the most amazing thing for me. And I was glad I got to do that show for New Year's. That's the only time I ever performed in my hometown. So having that opportunity was just icing on the cake, man. I'm super blessed to have met so many really good people.
That's cool. Well, I tell you what, I did some research before this show, and I did find a YouTube video
The vault.
of Scott. You can, if you go to YouTube, I typed in Scott Williams, Atlanta, comedian or comedy, and you came up. You did a gig about 13 years ago at, was it at the?
Twisted Taco.
No,
Twisted
it was.
Taco.
It
Funny
was.
Farm. No.
Funny Farm.
Oh, was it Nancy G's?
Gosh, I can't remember the venue.
I haven't seen those videos in
but
quite a while.
But it was a great skit. You had about 6.5 minutes, I think. And I mean, this is going way back because Gavin was like 3, you know.
Yeah.
And so, but anyway, it was a great skit. You know, folks, go out there and watch it. I mean, shame on Scott for not having more YouTube videos out there, but he's really talented, and look forward to possibly having you back on the show sometime.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. This is super exciting, and I love talking about comedy, and you know, there's hundreds and hundreds of more stories, but I'm sure you got plans for the next 2 weeks, so I won't dump all those on you at once. But,
all right,
yeah,
guys.
thanks for having me, man.
Yeah,
really
thank you,
it.
Scott. And Jason, I'll catch up with you, but everybody out there, have a great night, and thanks for your time.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks, guys.